Tangent. I'm Robert Gibson, alias Zendexor, and my colleagues are Nikita Zuev and XJ. Today we'll be talking about The Sowers of the Thunder by Robert E. Howard, a rip-roaring novella in which the author gives us a panoramic view of the clash of cultures in the early 13th century Orient, where Arabs, Crusaders and Mongols or Tartars engage in a three-cornered struggle for supremacy. In the foreground are the two main antagonists who, in the opening scene, meet in a tavern in Damietta in the Egyptian Delta. A tavern seems to be such a good place to start a tale that apparently the principle applies even in a Muslim country. An exiled would-be king of Ireland named Red Cahal is brooding over his past when a mysterious oriental warrior strides in. The encounter which follows is one of the best scenes in the Howard oeuvre, in which the two fighters engage in edgy dialogue, needling and challenging each other while yet evincing a grudging mutual respect. Finally, inebriated after a drinking bout, they fight with cudgels. Cahal wins, having knocked the Easterner unconscious, and staggers out. He does not yet know, and the reader does not yet know, who his opponent really is. The second section of the story zooms out and describes Cahal's further wanderings through the Levant as he seeks oblivion for his sorrows. Howard's 4-page account of this tints the savagery of the age with a dreamy patina of romantic colour, as he traces the aimless route of his melancholy protagonist till, in section 3, he visits the castle of a bandit knight, the Sieur d'Ibelin. They become friends, and by means of another helping of Howard's riveting dialogue, the reader is now given some details of Cahal's past and the treachery which had ruined his cause in Ireland. Cahal and the Sieur decide on a mad, virtually suicidal scheme to raid a treasure-filled castle at Shahrazar in Persia. What happens to their plan is not related directly. Instead, we are given another unforgettable scene at the castle of an Arab sheikh, Suleiman bin Omad, where the watchers see an unnamed Frank approaching on a dying horse. The Westerner turns out to be none other than Cahal. Suleiman demands, and I quote, "Nazarene, what do you here?" Cahal licked his blackened lips with a dry tongue. "When the wild dogs run, panther and buffalo flee together," he said. "Doom rushes from the east on Muslim and Christian alike. I bring you warning. Call in your vassals and make fast your gates, lest another rising sun find you sleeping among the charred embers of your hold." So this introduces the third element into the conflict, the dreaded Tartars, enemies of all. At this point, just over 1/3 of the way through the story, I will leave the denouement to be discussed by my colleagues. Before handing over to them, I'll just assure you that in the remaining narrative, the threads of the plot are all gathered in. We come to a climacteric recognition of the identity of the Eastern warrior in the opening scene, and we even get to meet the lady whose betrayal caused Cahal's exile. It all happens in a sunset battle scene where glory and disaster mingle in phantasmal chaos. My advice to readers: don't live your lives without reading this tale. So, who wants to take over? Nikki, would you like to say
Sure
something
thing.
about it?
Yeah. I'll attempt to do this whole thing justice. Yeah. The Sowers of Thunder, of the Thunder, God, how many thes do you need, English people? Yeah, it's a well structured tale. It's one of the finest tales that our author has created, in my opinion. And when I say one of the finest tales, I am talking about throughout all of his work. Right, it's very well paced, has a lot of interesting twists. Um, it has chapters that kind of end and begin with interesting premises. Each chapter is sort of a short story all on their own, with an interesting beginning and a twist at the end that leads us into the new chapter. And that's mostly seen through chapter 1 to through chapter 3. Right, chapter 1, we see these two people meet, and how they find this common camaraderie, and then one of them supposedly wins over the other and begins their journey further on. And then the second chapter is that man trying to find peace in these tumultuous times, and then being coerced into a very dangerous idea. And then chapter 3 begins with us skipping how badly that went, and with something even greater, even crazier coming on the horizon. And the story continues in this vein. But just to take those three as an example, right? Each and every single one of those could be fashioned into their own short story, even, right? They have a very good beginning and an end, each chapter, and it's well paced. However, if we're looking at the overarching story, I believe that the tale would actually benefit if we didn't have chapter 1 or 2, and if the whole story started with chapter 3. Because chapter 3 has such an opening. It's so powerful. Those people standing on the top of the castle, seeing this lone rider come up, and they're like, let's shoot him. And then the other guy goes, no. I mean, it's a single Christian riding towards a Muslim stronghold. He must be crazy or desperate, right? And then he comes to them with the news of the new attack by the Tartars, and how they're coming for Jerusalem. And I mean, that scene is just so powerful. The fact that we only get it in chapter 3 is, I feel like it should be at the forefront. So good that it is. It just sets up everything perfectly. All the stakes, everything. See, when you write about history and things that we understand as people almost intrinsically, because of the zeitgeist that we're around, even though maybe we are not part of those cultures, because we live in this melting pot called Earth, we understand what Jerusalem means to a Muslim person, to a Jewish person, to a Christian person, right? It means everything in their fate. So you could literally have just started the story with this guy arrives at the castle, and he's like, Jerusalem is about to fall. Boom, right? If this was a story made in the Hyborian age, you'd have to go into 2 pages of explaining why the city of Masale or whatever really meant a lot to all these, like all these religious individuals, right? And why this rider coming to this castle would be important. But because we have the shorthand that we just understand from the moment go as to why this is so important for all these people. I think a start that's more actiony would make the story better. But that's already improving on something that's good, right? I'm not in no way, shape, or form am I saying the Sowers or the Thunder, except for maybe they might take out the Thunder out of that. Yeah, I think the Sowers or Thunder is good enough. But otherwise, yeah, it's really good. It's really good. The twist is good. All the twists are good. It's a very unique perspective. Having the supposed king of Ireland, who never was really the king of Ireland, but he was promised to be one. somewhere in these lands of the Crusaders. Yeah, it's just fun. It's really interesting, captivating. I wish Robert E. Howard, taught me history.
Mhm.
Even though he does insert a lot of his own flair and characters that never existed, he gets all the right moments correctly in the story. He gets um, the I think they called the nickname for him was the Panther, right? Bybar, the Panther. Um, that historical figure is, performs very admirably in the tale. He is given his gravitas. The sacking of Jerusalem is, well paced. Maybe more action. That's what I want, and that's probably why I'm thinking why it should have started with chapter 3. Just get us right into there. Let's go. Because chapter 1 and 2 feel to me like it's one of them is a prelude and the second one is the prologue, and then we get to the real story. That's kind of how it feels. Even though all of them are written really well, I'm just talking about the overarching, like chapter 1 to chapter 7. I think there's 7 chapters, if I'm correct. Yeah, there you go. Those are my scrambled thoughts, opening thoughts for the moment. Yeah.
Well, XJ, what have you got to say about all this?
So the Sowers of the Thunder, and I'm gonna have
Right?
to.
How can you?
Yeah, I gotta agree with you, man. Why? Why? The Sowers of Thunder rose off the tongue so much better.
Yeah.
Is a historical fiction, and me being me, I tried to place the exact year while it was happening. Unfortunately, my Middle Eastern history is not up to par. I'm placing this before 1235 for sure, because the Mongolians never really pushed it all the way to Jerusalem until the later part of the 13th century, and anyway, it was the Qashmarians that sacked Jerusalem, and the Qashmarians are a Sunni Muslim tribe, I believe. So it definitely happened before 1235. And this is probably during the time of Subutai, who took his men on a merry picnic into the Middle East and then returned, only to come back later. His grandson, the grandson of Genghis Khan, who properly laid siege to the Middle East. That said, I really tried to like the story, but I don't, unfortunately. I found the story to be mostly pointless. Like, the guy, Red Cahal, was basically just drifting from one end of the Middle East to the other end. And not that I have a problem with Lonely Planet stories in principle, because I thoroughly enjoyed Guia of Sphere, for instance, which Nikki hated.
Because it was fucking pointless, but yes, go on.
Yes, just like this story. The difference between Guia of Sphere and this story is, through Guia of Sphere, we see the dying earth, and there are some really interesting locales with I think, in my mind, the probably the best scene right now. I don't know what I said back when we first covered Guia Sphere, but right now the scene that is the best in my mind is that really weird ruins of a village where there is a guy that is forced to play a flute for a woman for the rest of his life. That scene just sticks in my mind. It's great. It's weird. It's out of the world. And there is very little of that here in the Sowers of the Thunder. And it's not that it's not that I'm looking for pew pews, because it's a historical fiction after all. But because, and I do like I thoroughly enjoyed the Netflix Marco Polo. But that is because that story really shows us what at least the show creators thought the Mongolian Khanate was like. And there are a lot of missed opportunities, I feel like, when Red Cahal was like traveling his way across the Middle East. We come to a fortress of Suleiman, but we know absolutely there is absolutely no description of Muslim military culture or anything like that at all. You know, like all of the different factions in this this story is completely indistinguishable from one another. To me, there is no, I'm not taken on a tour through the Middle East with the Muslims, with their very own very distinct brand of honor and conduct, versus the Christians with their very own brand of honor and conduct. Like Kingdom of Heaven, if it gave me it feels like what the story had the potential to be kind of like the Kingdom of Heaven, that show. And Salahuddin in that show was depicted in his very own way, versus I don't remember the character who that Orlando Bloom played, but you know, they're very distinct. And he didn't, like, Robert E. Howard didn't try to even write with his own vision of what the Middle East is like so many European writers during his era, who they go to Cairo and then they write what they think Egypt is like. You know, like Agatha Christie, she went to Cairo and wrote what she thought Egypt was like, or all of those stories coming out of Egypt about mummies and stuff like that. It's just like it's very mundane, and the characters are basically a bunch of Conans yelling at each other. They are you have Turkic Conan yelling at Irish Conan, and Irish Conan left the tavern and met up with Bandit King Conan, and then met up with Danish Conan along the way. And they're all grim, shouty men with very little characteristics to differentiate one from the other, with the sole exception of Suleiman, I think. And
I think you over exaggerate the idea that all the characters are the same, but please go on.
It's like, again, it's not like I have an issue with Lonely Planet stories, completely aimless, where the characters just do like that. There are two manga series that I really like, and they are aimless stories as well. One is, I don't think have been translated into English yet, so I don't know what the title is, but the literal translation is The Aging Knight in the Borderlands, and the story is about as aimless as it could possibly be. It's just a retired knight going through the border of a fantasy country, eating food. It's basically Hungry Planet. It's like I don't know how much more aimless you could make a story, because it's not even food from the real world. It is food from a fantasy world. But the knight has a very interesting character. He has lived his whole life in service of other people. The love of his life died, and he at the age of what, 60, 70, he finally has had the time to do something for himself, you know. And that it is basically a retirement story about this guy who is trying to find meaning, a second meaning in life. And the entourage he has is very interesting. Sometimes they completely steal the show, you know. And then another one, which is like, again, it has nothing to do with well, it barely touches okay. The second one is called, I think it just got made into an anime, so you should probably be coming to the West pretty soon. Fieran, the Wake of Fieran, or the Remembrance of Fieran, or something like that. And the story starts 80 years after Fieran and her party of adventurers defeated the Demon King that threatened the world. It's like, what is this? This is an epilogue of a story that you will never read. Completely pointless. But Fieran is an interesting character. She is an elven mage who is a complete blockhead about her own feelings. And so the story is basically 80 years after the fact, she come to realize how important the adventurers that she defeated the Demon King with were to her. And by the time she realized that, they are 80 years in the grave. So it is her trying to come to terms with that. It's about as low key, and the characters are about as, the premise of the characters are about as unexciting as you could possibly imagine, but they are still more interesting than Red Cahal, the Bandit King, and I don't know, man. So Baibars is more interesting, but Baibars is an actual character. And so, I mean, I don't know. I found like there are a lot of missed opportunities. Red Cahal is a completely passive character. He has no aim, he has no character growth, and he stayed the same bitter man that he is the same bitter man that started the story as it ended. And I mean, he did change a little bit, but that is completely in spite of him, you know. I was like, when I read the part about the Masked Knight, I was like, no, man, please. Oh my God, please. No, don't let this be Eleanor D, what's her name? And it turns out it really is Eleanor of whatever. But yeah, I just couldn't like the story. It's very...
Sounds like you hated it, not like you didn't like it.
I found it very dull. Yeah, that's about it. Even like we covered some H.P. Lovecraft stories, and there are times like the Dunwich Horror when I wish the story would just get on with it and be over and done with. But even those stories are not as dull as the Sowers of Thunder to me. There's just nothing interesting for me to grab onto, unfortunately. Yeah.
All right, Robert, before you rip XJ a new one regarding that take, could you just tell us what you think about the story?
I can't fault it in any way. That's partly why I picked it, because I thought I'd pick the example of a story which I thought perfectly achieved its aim. And I'm really impressed with not only Howard's work, but with any writer who can write dialogue like this for historical a story. of course, the actual language spoken in the tale is not English. It's presumably he speaks Norman French. This Cahal person, to in international context in Outremer. I don't know, but I'm guessing. But then again, there's a special kind of English that you write to create a flavour of the past, whether the actual language was English or not. Walter Scott does it brilliantly, and sometimes the actual language is English, but more often it couldn't have been. If you do it right, it really sparkles, and Howard makes it sparkle. On the other hand, if you don't do it right, it looks absolutely, the effect is disastrous. It's like trying to tell a joke that isn't funny. It's a complete flop. So I haven't got this skill myself. I wish I had, but that's partly the reason I don't write historical fiction. Well, there are other reasons as well. But I really admire writers who can do it. So
I'd like to add on to that thought, if I may, Robert. I think the turn of phrase in this story is probably one of the best, if not the best, written works by Robert E. Howard. I really think so. I think every paragraph has at least one sentence where you think like, "Oh, that's well written," and sometimes it's entire paragraphs that you consume, and you're like, "Oh man, he described it this way. Whoa, I wouldn't think of your desires and your dreams and your past just being like clouds and mist, because they're nothing, right? That you kind of can see them, but you cannot touch them, and you're just like, oh man, why didn't I think of that? There's just so much craftsmanship, so much great work, irregardless of the tale or the plot or whatever, just from a perspective of how the artist paints the picture. It's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Especially in the last scene, I would say
I'm going to have to completely disagree with that. Yeah. For Red Cahal and all the Christians, I suppose they come across as maybe flavorful, but I cannot imagine that is how the Muslims would speak. Like, I don't know, man. It's like Howard thinks saying by Allah and by Allah, that makes them Islamic. I don't know, man. It just didn't come across that way to me. Like, I feel like the Suleiman and Baibars spoke the exact same way as the Christians did, and I'm like, no, I feel like they should be, their dialogue should be distinguishable, and not just because one says by Allah and the other says by God. Yeah.
What do you have to say to that, Robert?
I'm assuming that they're communicating by a sort of lingua franca of the Orient, and I think these characters they have a lot culturally in common. And one of the things they have in common is a pithy turn of phrase, which needn't be dependent on the particular language you're speaking. It's mainly an aspect of the imagination which is dominated by ideas, no matter what the ostensible religious affiliation is, dominated up by ideas of fate and destiny and the terrible pressures of life. So I don't. It would never occur to me to make the criticism that XJ has just made. I just don't think that way. I'm not in that groove when I react to a story like this. And it's not the only one I've read set in these times. I've read Walter Scott's novel The Talisman, which is about set in the time of the Third Crusade, a little bit earlier, 50 years earlier, which is also very good. I don't mind. It doesn't bother me, but it bothers XJ, so we'll just have to agree to differ.
Very wise, very wise. I do want to add regarding a completely different point. I didn't hate Guileless Fear. I think my comments were basically from the beginning of the podcast like, wow, very well written. I can't wait to see where this goes. Oh, this is the only story about the Guileless Fear. Wow. What? That was kind of my impression of that tale. And I mean, this tale has a very definitive ending. The sour, the thunder throwers.
Yeah,
I do
mean,
believe that it has a very terrible title. That I will agree with you on that.
can't get any more definitive than. But actually, I was gonna say you can't get any more definitive than the protagonist dying. However, a thought just struck me: is Red Cahal the actual protagonist of the story, or is it Baibas?
Well, they're both really, but Cahal is the main protagonist. But
he is the main carriage of the story, but I feel like Baibas is a much more dynamic character. He actually makes things happen. He does things.
Careful, you earlier you were saying that they were virtually the same.
They are virtually the same. They have this. They carry themselves the same way. They speak in almost the same way. But the difference between Baibas and Red Cahal is that Red Cahal is completely aimless. He just drifts from one place to the other. Baibas makes things happen. He dresses up, and goes into checks out spies by himself. He ends up in I think was it Suleiman's fortress. Fought with Suleiman against the Kashmirians. Then at the end, joins up with the Kashmirians to lay siege to Jerusalem. So he is not a passive character. He makes things happen. And that's what I'm thinking, is Baibas the actual protagonist of the story, or because I can't see Red Cahal as the protagonist. He's completely passive.
Well, it's an argument. You can argue this one way or the other, but the thing is, the story is what it is. Whatever labels you attach the characters. I would disagree strongly that Cahal is aimless. He's got a very strong aim, which is to forget, and he's hoping to get lots of hard knocks, which will help him to forget what the treachery that he suffered from in the past. The aim is not an ambitious one in the way that his opponent's is, but it's still an aim, and it makes sense of the way he wanders around.
Well, that's I suppose we will definitely have to agree to disagree on that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, just I just found Red Cahal to be I just don't find that he makes things happen, I suppose.
No, he doesn't make things happen on purpose, but he prevents something happening in that he warns people of what's going to happen.
Fair enough. Although I have to say, I might have read the part wrong. To be fair, is wasn't Suleiman's fortress the one that he and Bandit King Conan wanted to sack?
No, the one in Persia, Shahrazar, they never got there.
Okay. Yeah, I must have misread then. Yeah.
Like, think about it. Like, they were riding right, and then they met the Mongols, and then they started riding hard left. Right, like, well, only Cahal, I guess.
I don't think the Mongols ever made an appearance in this story, though. It was the Quashmarians. The Quashmarians met the Mongol and were driven by the Mongols.
All right, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Although in real history, I'm looking up the history of the real Baibars. 16 years after this happened, he did fight a battle with the real Mongols and
Yeah,
defeated them.
and I believe he won one
Yes.
major battle, and that was that actually stalled the Mongolian advance by many years.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Mamluks.
Mm.
Yeah. So
Well,
yeah, I mean, well, I will agree with Nikki on one thing. I do think chapter 3 is a better start, and I think it would have been a lot better if the story is focused on Baibars instead. Yeah, I just
I'll have to disagree with both of you on that one. I understand the point, but I think that the point of the brilliant chapter 3, the kind of shock of it, is a radical change of priorities. And in order to highlight that radical change of priorities, you need to have a feel of what the priorities were before. And that's why you need chapters 1 and 2 before chapter 3.
Right, but that's presuming that you as the reader care about this Irish guy.
Yes.
Which I think what we're finding out is that, well, here's the spectrum that I currently see. Robert enjoyed the story, the characters, the environment, and the prose. I enjoyed the environment, the prose, and the craftsmanship. And then XJ read this. that's kind of the spread. That's kind of the spectrum, right? So I think the premise of the character of this Irish king is awesome, but its execution is not what I would say is well done. Now, the reason why I'm calling this one of the greatest stories by Robert E. Howard is not because of its contents or its plot. It is solely because of the craftsmanship. The way everything is written, whether authentic or not, I didn't really care about that. I cared about the way it's written and if it's written well. And that, I feel, at least from my side, no one can take away. It's very well written. It's written in a way where all of the sentences flow. There's great pace. And my only problem is that if you're looking at it as chapter 1 to chapter 7, you have to fix the pace of how the story climbs. But if you're just looking at it chapter 1, you stop reading, and then you read the next day chapter 2, you stop reading, and then the pacing is awesome. The pacing is great. It's like if it was like a mini series of novels that you would be reading, like, and every chapter comes out every week, sure, then the pace is fine. But if you're reading it all in one go, you have the trouble of climbing over three starts. The story has 3 starts. The first start is like, we're in a tavern having a discussion with this guy, let's have a fight with him. Second start, now in a completely different place, traveling through this area, the supposed not dethroned, he never had the throne, the exiled king of Ireland desires to do something with his life. Smash cut to, okay, now forget all that. The people who are scared of the Mongols are coming. They're gonna kill everyone. So it's jarring. It's a start and stop, and a start and stop, and start and stop. And I understand what you mean when you talk about chapter 2 and chapter 3, right? That like the horrifying change of priorities. It definitely works, right? The way it's currently placed, that definitely happens. But I don't think that effect is how do I say this? If we are to look at 2 possibilities, one in which the pace of the story is better and the excitement and the start is immediate and just like punch in the face, and the reader doesn't even have a moment to think whether or not he likes the story. He's just like, oh no, Jerusalem is about to fall, right? Versus this really cool payoff between chapter 2 and chapter 3. I'm going for option A, right? I think option A makes the story even better. While option 2 might be a masterstroke of genius between these two chapters, as a whole, I feel like it fails. There you go.
I always prefer a scene to be set calmly. Then you can settle yourself and get ready to enjoy a story. Then you can have dramatic changes of scene, which, after all, in some ways are true to life, because life can get jerky. But I don't particularly enjoy the kind of story that starts, a shot rang out, Black Jack bloody blah took cover and there looked to see where his enemy was hiding. So I just don't particularly go for that thing. I like to know the kind of scene it is, and
yeah, but hold on, you would have enough of that with the two however many Muslim individuals looking at this guy and writing to it, writing the Christian writing towards them. There's no like, and a huge zombie came out, like at the beginning of chapter 3 or something like that. I think you're not being entirely fair here.
I suppose so, but I don't know. I understand that point, but I still think that the reason I have no criticisms about this story is that I accept it totally for what it is, and I think that my acceptance has been earned by the writer because of his skill. I also would question the distinction that you tend to assume, Nikki, between action and description, because the description is linked to an emotional state, and to me emotion is action. It's changes in one's head, whereas action is changes in the exterior material world. But it's both of them are changes and developments. And
sure, if chapter 1 started with them just talking, and they were talking about how the tribes are coming to Jerusalem, that also would be fine with me. We are establishing the situation. The problem isn't the fact that people are killing each other or something, not killing each other, and therefore I'm bored. The problem is that the stakes of the tale come too late. That's the thing, right? And you're saying, well, it's a great thing because the stakes change from chapter 2 to chapter 3, and that's like boom, an explosive thing for you where you didn't expect it or something like that. And I'm saying that's not good enough of a reason not to have the stakes immediately in front of the reader. And I think the tale would be better if the stakes would be immediately in front of them.
Well, you'd sacrifice the irony. I don't know if irony is the right word, the symmetry, because the two main antagonists meet in a tavern in scene 1, and they meet again on the battlefield at the last scene, and that kind of fits together nicely.
I think Nikki's point is you could still set the stakes in that tavern scene.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, that's what I said.
You could say they could have a dialogue about the dastardly Mongolians on the horizons about to march on Jerusalem, and everybody was like wondering when the Mongols would come, and that would be an example of a way of setting up the stakes. Am I explaining that correctly, Nikki?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's exactly it. So if I would, not at the risk of repeating myself, I don't care how the situation is introduced. The reason I select chapter 3 as the beginning is because it sets up the rest of the story. And chapter 1 and chapter 2 are these beautiful vignettes that pay off at the end as well. But the main plot, the main hook that's changed, the shift from chapter 2 to chapter 3, doesn't feel to me like a move that's worth it if by chapter 1 you still don't really know what is the story about, right? And you have to give at least a hint. It could be a passing 3-sentence like 3-4 sentence conversation between these two people, like, wow, so there's like I hear the tidings that there is one more enemy joining this battle, and they will be not Muslim nor Christian, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard these news as well, the hordes are coming, but like they are far away from here, right? And then the reveal at chapter 3 could be that, like, oh, we were like, the news were wrong, they're like at the doorstep of Jerusalem, this is happening tomorrow, right? Like something.
I mean, that would have been in perfect historical keeping with how scary the Mongols actually were back then, because the most scary thing about the Mongols was that you think they'll be 3-4 a month away from you, and then 2 weeks later they're behind you. And that's the really scary thing about the Mongols. And there is a little bit of that conveyed in, I think, chapter 3, which I will give Robert E. Howard for. It was quite effective, although again the actual people laying siege on Jerusalem was not the Mongols but the Kashmirians. But yeah, I mean, I can see Nikki's point.
I think the other scary thing about the Mongols is they were sort of about 4 feet tall and 6 feet wide, and
the Mongols are really scary. They have a really brutal reputation. Yeah. The other thing, though, is also the other thing that I did not quite take with Robert E. Howard was the depiction of the Mongols. They are not barbarians. They have siege engines.
Well, I think you have to think about it from the perspective of the Christian of the time. These people look very different. There's only one word that would come into their minds. I think.
Well, I mean, fair enough. They probably looked and act the part of barbarians, but they are not a swarm of locusts. Is what I'm saying. They have siege engines. Yeah. They have siege engines, bro. They got all that from the Chinese.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think Robert E. Howard was really thinking about who he's depicting fairly in what way. I think he was just trying to stay true to what he feels like those times were.
Fair enough.
But I mean, everybody talks about the Roman Empire, right? Like, but it took them years to get all those territories. The Mongols fucking did it in a lifetime of one dude. It's like, it's scary.
I admit that this part is just me nerding out, and I want to plug in this excellent podcast by Dan Carlin about the Mongols, the Golden Horde, I think it was. Check that out. That's an excellent podcast. Yeah.
1244, by the way, was the date. I think not before 1235, because the battle, the climax battle, which is called Hiribiar.
1244. Okay.
Yes, and the Sacred
Jerusalem. I admit my Middle Eastern history is not that great, so probably a lot of things.
Neither is mine, but I just looked it up for this podcast.
Yeah, it's how does it feel? Because one way or another, I feel like I am your child, Robert. So how do you feel being disappointed by me? Like, does this sting? I mean, I still like the story, right? I just have minor criticisms.
That's what that's inseparable from being a parent. It's a very disappointing experience.
I mean, in my opinion, I think it should be. I think you should be more disappointed with
hope.
with my brother XJ here, because he just fucking hates the story. I like it still.
I don't hate the story. I have to say that again. I'm just like completely indifferent to it.
Which is probably worse, actually.
Your description was spot on, by the way, Nikki. XG read the story. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the meter.
That's
The meter.
But I find it amazing that you thought it was dull. I mean, I can't understand how anyone could think this story was dull. Really cool.
I don't know. I just found it out because, look, it's not that I have a problem with aimless stories. Like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed Guel's Sphere. And I like the Fearing of whatever, and then the Aging Night at the Borderlands. I like Journey to the West, and Journey to the West is about as aimless and episodic as you can possibly imagine.
What are you talking about? It's a journey to the West. It's on the title. That's what it's about.
So here's the thing that most people probably don't know if you haven't read the actual story. Mm-hmm. Journey to the West starts in the middle of the book. It took, and the
isn't
tome,
it the beginning? There's the origin story.
The tome was 3,000 pages of really dense classical Chinese, and this Journey to the West didn't start until the middle part. It was like,
yeah, isn't it like basically the beginning is like once there was a monkey and he was like super upset about being a monkey, so he decided to be the king of the monkeys.
Pretty much, and then he went this place to study immortality, and then he went the other place. And the story didn't start until midway through.
I mean, origin stories are very important.
It's like you want to talk about a slow burn start. Can't get any slower than Journey to the West. The 1-2 chapter, the stakes of the story didn't even come. There is no stakes to the story actually. Now that I think about it, literally no stakes.
What makes you feel that all of these characters are Conan?
So first of all, they carry themselves the same way. They speak very loudly. They are a hair trigger from violence, and they are men of action and fearless. Basically, they have all that Conan vibe,
Well, you have to be a man of action in that.
Fair enough, but you could be. I mean, Suleiman is a little bit different because Suleiman is a bit more introspective. If the way I read him, and you could have a man of action that is a little bit more cautious, a man of action that is more cunning, a man of action that is more selfish. I don't know. It's like
Baibars fits
Baibars is the way I read Baibars is he has his own aims. He wants to be a king, and so to be a king you got to be a little bit different with your aims. You can't just look at a guy and then just go for honor and glory and charge. We call that in Chinese 匹夫之勇. As a king, you kind of have to be a little bit different. So okay, I accept that difference, but essentially though, they all act pretty much the same way. They are people that are larger than life, who live in the moment, and it's just indistinguishable from. They are indistinguishable for me. They are like all cut from the same template.
What character would you introduce into the story to make it better?
Oh man, you know who I feel should have been given a little bit more screen time? Danish Conan, Wolfgar.
Okay. Why do you feel like Danish Conan needed more time?
Well, Danish Conan would have been a little bit more. He starts out pretty much the same way, big, strong man, shouty, cursing. But he has a little bit. He is a little bit different because he's more deferential to his charge. So I feel like if he had been given a little bit more development, he might have become a little bit different. And there are a lot of missed opportunities in the story. I feel like Robert E. Howard could have went with Baibars and really developed Baibars, or he could have really developed the thing between Red Cahal and Eleanor, the Chancery. Is that her name? I don't remember.
De Courcy.
De Courcy. So either way, it would have been much better than to me, it would have been better than the current situation where Red Cahal is basically really forgettable as a character. He is aimless. He has no entourage that is interesting. So okay, if Eleanor had been introduced earlier into the story and had a chance to be developed, then Wolfgar would have been given a chance to become an interesting part of Red Cahal's entourage, and he might have his own character that would have made the story more interesting. It's like anything, man. Anything to for me to latch onto. There's just nothing for me to latch onto in this story.
Well, I think the brief appearances need to be brief in the story.
Fair enough.
I think that's part of their point, that I anyway feel, although he's a totally different sort of person from me, I feel I'm being put into Red Cahal's shoes because because the genius of the author gives me a glimpse into the emotions he feels at fleeting glimpses of what might have been, and also the chance he takes the chance he's given in these last few moments of life of forgiveness, and that to me is proof that he does actually develop as a character. But it's not overplayed, it's just brief, like a great line in a poem it can be very brief, but nevertheless it packs its punch because it is where it is in the story. I don't think things have to be extracted and developed when the whole point really is that it's a brief flash of something or other.
Well, as I said, the character development of Red Cahal doesn't even need, for me, it didn't even need to be a very, very big change or big shift, because like I said, the aging knight at the Borderlands, that story, the guy is just about as low key as you can possibly imagine. He's basically a retirement story, and I don't know how much more low key and brief you could possibly get than that. But it's I think what this story suffers from for me is that there is nothing for me to latch onto. I think that would be the best way to describe it. There is no world building that I can get behind, like Guia's Sphere. There is no character development that I can get behind. There is no the protagonists don't even really have that interesting of a premise to me, like the aging knight of Yeren. So at the end of the day, um, I guess, well, I will. There are some bangers of lines. I'll give it that. The best line I feel is all the way at the end by Baibas. I have conquered, answered Baibas, shaken for the first time in his wild life, but I am half blind, and of what avail to slay men of that breed? They will come again and again and again, riding to death like a feast because of the restlessness of their souls. Through all the centuries, what though we prevail this little now? They are a race unconquerable, and at last, in a year or 1,000 years, they will trample Islam under their feet and ride again through the streets of Jerusalem. And I thought, well, that's a pretty powerful prophetic line from Baibas. Very, very despairing, I would say.
Yeah, I found that very powerful too, but I don't know that I actually understand what he's referring to, because the Khwarezmians were his allies. And yet he's talking about them. Presumably it's them he's talking about.
No,
as
he's
though-
talking about the Christians.
You think so?
Yeah.
I didn't get that impression. But I suppose it could be. He says, "Of what avail to slay men of that breed?" So, in other words, he's talking about Red Cahal.
He's talking about Red Cahal, yeah.
Right. Well, thank you. You've helped me, because I was puzzled by that. It sounded as though he was talking about some sort of nomad horde, because they will come and again, riding to death like a feast. Because of course, we don't seem to do that anymore. So his prophecy hasn't
Well,
really happened.
it did happen multiple times in the 13th and 14th century, I believe.
Yeah,
Well,
Crusades did continue. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Crusades
Crusades.
did continue, right? It happened.
No.
It kept going. It didn't.
Well, I mean, the Jerusalem was lost by that time, and it was never regained by the Crusaders.
Yeah, but that doesn't exile the fact that there were more Crusades.
Yeah, they were pretty unsuccessful, though.
But that doesn't cancel out what XJ said, right?
Yeah.
There were more Crusades. Just because they were just because they sucked, doesn't mean that they didn't exist.
I see.
I mean,
Right.
I mean, I don't know if they quite trampled Islam under their feet, and maybe they didn't ride through the streets of Jerusalem again, but they did keep coming. The Crusades did keep coming.
I mean,
for how many years?
Well,
I couldn't say to you.
Not much longer, really.
But
go on.
Well,
Last stronghold was Acre, and that fell in 1292 or something like that. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no problem. To me, this is I'm a cool character, but I'm written by a writer who wants the Christians to win at the end. Right? It sounds like, oh yeah, these beasts, keep coming until they slay us, but we will continue to fight, right? But at the same time, it's also like, yeah, our foe is mighty, and one day they will defeat us. That's the way I read it, at least. In his writings to H.P. Lovecraft, Howard did come find in him and saying that, like, he really liked the story, but he wishes he wrote more about the triumphs of the Christian faith. So maybe that's why I'm being funneled into thinking that this is about this sort of like a victorious speech, but with a future defeat in sight, so to say. I have to say that I find the ending very powerful. And yes, I saw it a mile away that this guy in a helmet is, not a guy or in a helmet, but that didn't matter. It was still fun. It was still a cool situation, and it really brought out a great craftsmanship. As I said, you really have to look at this work not from a perspective of is this plot good, but is this written well? And if you're looking at it like that, I mean, you could take the Sowers of the Thunder, take paragraphs out of it, rework them into short stories, and create good short stories because you stole stuff from the Sowers of Thunder, the way they're written, in different context. But you could really make amazing work.
I will grant you that there are moments in this short story that are quite good. I will also agree with you that this feels very episodic. Each chapter seems to be its own short story, and I didn't think of it until you mentioned it. But you're right. It does feel like each of these chapters feel like their own short stories. Until towards the end, I would say. No, wait.
Yeah, chapter 6 and 7 are kind of.
Yeah, 6 and 7 are kind of the same. But even then, there is a bit of a time skip in chapter 7.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's very similar to the way George R. R. Martin writes, and why I think his writing is so famous. Because if you read Game of Thrones, each chapter is like there's like a beginning, middle, and an end, like in a short story. Like, think of the Bran chapter, right? That it's everything starts with, we see Winterfell, we see all these people, we get introduced to them, everything seems fine and dandy. Bran falls. Oh, like boom. Ned's chapter. We begin with like he's meeting the king, he's having all these situations. The king offers him something that he doesn't really want. He has to contemplate on it, and then he finds out, oh, someone killed John Arryn. He didn't die. Someone killed him, and and so on and so forth. Right, and it's a really good formula, to be honest. Writing your chapters as if they were, they have to have a beginning, middle, and an end. But it sounds very difficult too.
Yeah, well.
All right, well, good input there, actually.
I feel like the biggest difficulty George R. R. Martin has right now is to actually pick up the pen.
I mean, I wasn't talking about him specifically, whether it's hard or not to write for him. I was just thinking of when it comes to, maybe I'll try and do that for my next short story. Just write every chapter as if it was like a short story of its own.
Wow, that would be very tough. I agree with you.
Yeah. All right. So, hands on the table scores. For craftsmanship, I give the story an insurmountable 10.1 out of 10. Like 10.1 out of 10 for craftsmanship.
You can't go over 10.
No. If Papa can do it, I can do it. And for the, I mean it in a very endearing way, Robert. I hope you know. For the story and whenever you put it all together, I'd give it a 7.5. 7.5 out of 10. Still, it's very enjoyable. There are a couple of things that I would personally change that I feel that would make it better, but that's my personal opinion. I recognize the work as being tremendous and very well done.
Yeah. Well, I was I would have given it 9.9, but as XJ has kindly explained to me the meaning of the last paragraph, I'll give it a 10.
Ooh. Damn.
Wow.
I mean, hold on. Before you give your score, XJ, I'm very sorry. Can't you see a single fault in the story? Robert, look at it. Like, is there nothing that you really would say that like detracts from it? Really?
No.
So what was the minus 0.1 that score you given? What would have been the minus 0.1?
It's just because I didn't understand that last bit, but now I do.
Okay, fair enough.
And it's probably my fault that I didn't understand it, But, you see, I'm so humble that I assume that. Funny, I thought I heard someone laugh just then. I assume that if I get something wrong, it's my fault, not the author's fault. See?
I'm trying so hard not to laugh into the microphone. Robert, you are a treasure to the people of Earth. We must preserve you at all costs. Like, forget about the tigers. Let them die. We have to keep Robert safe. All right. Actually, ungraded out of 10, 0 out of 10. What are we going with for you? I read well,
I'm totally.
I think Robert.
I'm totally stealing that. By the way, it's
no problem. It's yours. It's yours. Robert E. Howard is spinning in his grave and is planning his revenge. All right.
Yeah, if his revenge is good stories, come for me, brother.
Like you stand in the middle of the crossroads.
So what was your score, XJ? I didn't catch it.
I read it out of 10.
Oh, I see.
Father is disappointed. Let me translate that. I see. All right. Once again, viewers, thank you so much for coming to our podcast, and hopefully you also read it and enjoyed, or just read the story. Thank you all for coming. Please like, subscribe. Tell us if there's anything that you feel that we could change or make better, so that you enjoy the podcast more. And yeah, until next time.
Have a great day.
Yep.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.